Colorado Governor Polis offered no answers, but vowed to, quote, take a hard look at why red flag laws did not prevent last week's tragic Club Q murders, despite the suspect having had previous interactions with law enforcement, something we hear over and over again. Meanwhile, Representative Boebert had this to say about the onslaught of criticism she received from Democrats after the suspected crime. Let's watch.
You cannot just continue to blame society for evil people. At some point, you have to blame the criminal instead of just doing whatever you can to get the blame off of them and release them back into society quicker. Dan, I have been accused of just about every mass shooting there has been since the left has learned of my name, whether it's Uvalde or the King Super shooting in Boulder, Colorado, or the Buffalo, New York shooting, or even Paul Pelosi getting hammered. I have been blamed for all of them. And so all of this, it has to come to an end, this blame game. I think the left is pissed that I won my election.
Of course they are.
And so they're trying to find something to go after me about.
So I agree that we should be very careful about, blaming others for the actions of deranged killers, deranged gunmen. This is something that both sides like to do all the time, try to figure out the crazy killers' political ideology, see if they have a discernible political ideology, and then try to blame, whoever fits it. This is something that went very, very wrong notoriously in the Tucson shooting, where Sarah Palin was blamed by many in the media, because she put a target over that Congresswoman Gifford's district, but then it turned out that the shooter, Jared Loughner, had probably never seen that, and while he was, political in a kind of abstract or vague sense, his views were crazy. They were not necessarily right wing, or he was not like some kind of Tea Party patriot. And then, that dynamic has repeated itself. Some killers do have a discernible political ideology. I think we're still waiting, to see what the case is here. Maybe it's an anti-LGBT killing and crime. And I would say it's just wrong to say things that malign those communities, regardless of whether it has inspired this attack. And I think everyone is being or should be a little careful, just because the most familiar or most similar seeming attack, the Pulse shooting, ended up having nothing to do with anti-LGBT bigotry. It was randomly targeted by a Muslim extremist. So I think that's why it's right to be cautious here. Now, it may turn out that that this guy is the biggest Boebert fan. I'm probably not right, but is a right-wing person or is radicalized by right-wing rhetoric against these people. I would that rhetoric is bad and irresponsible, obviously. But I don't know. What do you think, Batya?
I mean, so obviously part of me agrees, you can't walk around accusing people of being murderers for disagreeing with you politically. And the left has created this new term, stochastic terrorism, which basically means anybody talking about a topic that is not on their side politically. And of course, to call your opponents a terrorist is also to put a target on their back, right? To call Lauren Boebert a murderer is to suggest that she needs the kind of justice that maybe somebody who believes in vigilante justice would take into their own hands. At the same time, I'm certainly guilty of this. How many times have I said that the left's, bail reform, they have blood on their hands for allowing murderers back into communities? How many times have I said that they're, that them refusing to talk about violent crime or sentencing their fellow Americans to death, essentially? So I feel on the one hand, yes, we need to bring down the rhetoric, but I also know that I am guilty of it. And when I ask myself, are you willing to not say that anymore? I don't know that I am, because I feel it so deeply. And so somebody who feels that so deeply, who feels that criticizing Drag Queen Story Hour could inflame a crazy person to take an action like this, I don't know that I can consistently say, well, you're not allowed to say that anymore.
Well, you're a uniquely self-scrutinizing person, Batya. We should all take a page out of your book in terms of that, for sure. I guess it's different. Well, and in some sense, this is something liberals used to think, and many of them still do think, or classical liberals as well, as some you have good free speech progressives, right, that there's a difference between words and actions, that, it's I can see charging someone with having blood on their hands for having supported or enacted, rather, a policy that has a harmful or violent or bad outcome, different, which is somewhat different than just saying things that maybe are bad or wrong or offensive, but are not, the words inspire, right? That's why we have this ironclad protection for saying, really like edgy things, really bad things. We protect that. We say, well, that's different than actually taking a swing at someone.
Yes.
But look, I agree with you. The rhetoric around trans issues and drag queens and all that, I think has gotten very overheated on the right. There's a lot of conflating of different things. I understand or sympathize with people who don't think that children belong around events where there's sexual content, where there's stripping. That doesn't describe all of these things. Sometimes it's just people dressed up in costumes, which that seems to me to be quite a different thing. But honestly, it's not my business. Parents and how they parent and what they think is appropriate for their children is I don't have any desire really to prescribe that or even weigh in on that. It's just not my business. I'd probably not approve of what some of these parents are doing, but that's their problem. And I don't think involving the state in a lot of just as I don't think involving the state in more of people's what COVID risks they are willing to take would be a good idea. I generally would just devolve to leaving people alone, and that is a tendency on a lot of subjects that the right has, and then on different opposite subjects, progressives have, and neither side wants to admit, well, isn't that the same principle for all these other things then? We're saying we should generally leave people alone, even if you don't approve or you think it's bad or something. So anyway, that's a long way of saying I do think some people are getting a little bit over their skis on this stuff. Now, whether it had anything to do with this shooting remains to be seen, and I think it's very wrong to kind of jump to conclusions before we've learned more. And then also to try to retrofit an agenda onto what's obviously a disturbed and crazy person, a person with, it sounds like a really horrible. I don't want to draw any sympathy to this person. This is evil. He should face the full consequences of his actions. There was a clip going around last week of his dad talking about this. It sounds like his dad hadn't seen him in a long time, or maybe even thought he was already dead. And the father seems like a real piece of work. He sounded like, if you watch this clip, you can go watch it if you really want to, basically was relieved that his son who was accused of the shooting is not believed to be gay, however. And the person interviewing is okay, but he did just shoot up a club. That's really, he killed people. And the dad is sort of saying, well, at least he's not gay though. It's pretty horrible stuff anyway. Obviously this is all horrible, and people should turn down the rhetoric for sure.
Yeah, we know that he at least, or that is it that the shooter is now identifying as non-binary and going by mixed pronouns. So just adding an added layer to it, which
something CNN thought was transparently ridiculous when they covered it.
Right. Yeah, exactly. I will just say I do think that the principle of allowing parents to choose how to parent their children, it does have a limit, right? We have sort of as a society decided, for example, it's no longer okay to hit your children, right? Most of our society, I think, now agrees pretty much about that. We do have a category of child abuse that we don't accept a parent is allowed to inflict on their child. I think the question is, does taking a child to a burlesque act, for a lot of Americans, in fact, I think for a lot more Americans than our mainstream media would like us to believe, that actually does cross a boundary that, deserves some kind of investigation or, some kind of social response to it. Obviously, God forbid, nothing like what happened here. But in terms of the rhetoric, our country is right now engaged in a very heated debate about sexuality, sexual identity, gender, and age appropriateness. And I think that the normie position on that, where most Americans are at on that, is much more conservative than where the basically 95% of our media is at. And so that makes people feel, I think, like they don't have any control over, what their child is maybe being taught in school, what their child is being exposed to. And I think that sort of I think in a lot of people that kind of activates a protective instinct that makes the rhetoric very heated. Now, again, I don't want to be defending overheated rhetoric about this stuff. I personally find the groomer rhetoric to be way too close for comfort to how they used to call all gay people pedophiles in order to undermine them and their quest for civil rights. I don't like that discourse at all. But
and
I think.
Yeah, I just know from, no, I agree with you. I just know from looking at a lot of child protective services cases that, I mean, they're travesty. They're disasters every time. And that even in cases where children are in danger, there's something bad going on, the intervention of CPS can almost inevitably makes things worse, because then you end up having kids split up from their siblings, put in foster care homes that are often way more abusive, even if there was some underlying problem. It's
Totally.
really, and also
totally
I worry about how this could be weaponized against actually religious families too, homeschooling, Jewish families in New York, and there's, think of the coverage of those schools from the mainstream media. So it seems like that's also just a warning I have for conservatives. Like, think really hard before you want to empower the state to take a closer look or at what parenting decisions are getting made, because I think that would ultimately
100%.
not devolve to our benefit.
I think what they're choosing is a political debate over something like an intervention like that. But I think to them, you take something like what just happened with Balenciaga, where they put out an ad that was 100% explicitly sexualizing children, right? They had children holding teddy bears that were in sort of fetish gear. And the idea that of the thousands of people involved in a massive fashion brand like Balenciaga, in green lighting something like that, no one said this is a horrible idea. I think when conservatives look at Drag Queen Story Hour, that's what they see. They see a culture that is mainstreaming something that the vast majority of us think is not okay. And so rather than, going in and taking children away from parents, almost always a horrible idea, I think they're opting for this public debate that the left is trying to smear as terrorism, essentially.
Good points. All right, we'll have more Rising right after this. Stay tuned for more discussion.